You're not a nurse anymore, the hospital CEO hissed, his breath warm against her ear as he leaned in close enough that Ava caught the sharp tang of his expensive cologne.
You're a mental patient. And once you board that plane, I want you gone. Vanished.
Ava stood alone at the airport gate, her scrubs wrinkled and coffee-stained, a small carry-on bag resting at her feet, neck brace securing her head, bruised wrist wrapped in gauze, eyes hollowed from exhaustion, but still sharp, still watching. Across the terminal, the CEO smiled like a man of God, gesturing calmly to airport security, spinning his story like she was the threat, like she was unhinged. Then she saw him, a tall man in green camouflage uniform, silver hair cropped tight, a light beard edging his jaw, standing near the tall windows like he was part of the storm brewing outside. A Navy SEAL commander. Ava's fingers moved once, subtle, silent, a signal she'd learned in the dust and blood of Afghanistan. The commander's newspaper stopped mid-page. He didn't even glance her way. He just stood, rage written across his face, and the CEO's face drained white. Because the commander wasn't walking toward Ava, he was walking toward him. Before we begin, if you're into intense medical military thrillers like this one, drop a quick comment telling me where you're tuning in from and smash that subscribe button. Now let me take you inside an airport terminal where a rookie nurse was about to be erased from existence. The first thing Ava noticed wasn't the sea of travelers rushing past. It wasn't the departures board flickering overhead. It wasn't even the dark storm clouds gathering over the runway like an incoming threat. It was the way the hospital CEO positioned himself just inches behind her, like he'd already claimed ownership of the very air she breathed. His breath ghosted against her ear, expensive cologne clashing with the stale bitterness of airport coffee. "You're not a nurse anymore," he whispered, each word dripping with venom. "You're a mental patient. And the second you step onto that plane, I want you gone, completely vanished." Ava didn't flinch. Her scrubs were rumpled, coffee-stained. A cheap foam neck brace forced her head into an uncomfortable angle, and white gauze wrapped her wrist like a silent accusation. To anyone watching, she looked defeated, broken, but her eyes were still razor-sharp, still calculating. The CEO, Richard Halden, stepped away and transformed instantly into someone else entirely, smiling, composed, almost saintly. He approached airport security like a concerned shepherd protecting his flock. "She's unstable," he said, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. "She assaulted multiple staff members. She's a danger to herself and everyone around her. We've been doing everything we can to help her." Ava heard every calculated syllable, the rehearsed cadence, the way he positioned each word so it sounded like genuine concern instead of the threat it truly was. A security guard's eyes traveled from Ava's neck brace to her bruised wrist, then back to the CEO's immaculate designer suit. And in that moment, Ava understood the brutal truth. In this world, the man in the expensive suit would always be believed first. Ava kept her mouth shut because she'd learned something working in hospitals that they never teach you in nursing school. Sometimes, the harder you try to explain yourself, the more guilty you appear. She gripped her boarding pass so tightly the paper began to crease and bend. Her single carry-on bag sat at her feet like the last tangible piece of her former life. She wasn't leaving by choice. She was leaving because Halden had systematically destroyed her, made her unhireable, untrustworthy, mentally unstable. He'd filed official reports. He'd contacted the medical board. He'd even personally arranged this flight, playing it off like some generous gesture. But the reality was far more sinister. He wasn't helping her disappear gracefully. He was making absolutely certain she could never come back. Then Ava saw him. Not the CEO, not security. The man standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows. Green camouflage uniform, perfectly worn. Broad, powerful shoulders. Silver gray hair buzzed military short. A light beard tracing his strong jawline. He stood with the kind of absolute stillness that somehow made all the terminal chaos feel distant and muted, like the entire world instinctively lowered its volume in his presence. He wasn't wearing formal dress blues. He wasn't seeking attention. He looked like someone who'd walked straight out of a combat zone and never quite left it behind mentally. And the strangest detail? He wasn't watching the departure gate or checking his phone. He was staring out at the approaching storm like he was methodically counting down minutes to something. A Navy SEAL commander. Ava didn't know his name, didn't know his rank, but she instantly recognized the bearing, that quiet, unshakable authority. That weight carried deep in his eyes, the kind that comes from seeing things most people never will. And for the first time in 72 agonizing hours, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Halden cornered her in that empty hospital corridor, a possible way out. Halden caught her glancing that direction and immediately invaded her space again, his voice dropping to a threatening hiss. "Don't even think about it," he whispered harshly. "You're nobody now. You're just a fired nurse in dirty scrubs. He won't help you." Ava didn't respond. She didn't look at Halden. She didn't even glance directly at the commander. Instead, she moved her fingers once, down low by her thigh, subtle enough that no civilian observer would ever catch it. A signal she hadn't learned from her father or any training manual. She'd learned it in Afghanistan, surrounded by dust and blood and desperate radio chatter. A tactical signal that meant one simple thing: I need help, but I absolutely cannot say it out loud. The commander's newspaper stopped moving mid-page. He didn't turn his head. He didn't look in her direction. He didn't create any kind of scene, but his entire body language shifted, like an internal switch had been flipped. His shoulders tensed and tightened, his jaw locked into place. And then he began folding the newspaper slowly, deliberately, like someone making an irreversible decision. Halden saw it happen, and the color drained from his face so rapidly it would have been almost comical in any other situation. He took an involuntary step backward, his body reacting before his brain could process. His practiced smile vanished completely. His eyes darted frantically to the exits, to security personnel, to Ava, back to the commander. Then he forced the smile back onto his face, too wide now, transparently fake. "Sir!" Halden called out, moving toward him like this was a happy coincidence. "I'm so sorry to bother you." The commander didn't allow him to finish. He raised one hand, not aggressively, just with absolute finality. Halden stopped mid-stride like he'd been physically yanked back by an invisible force. The commander finally turned his head and looked directly at Ava for the first time. His gaze landed on her neck brace, her wrapped wrist, the bruising that clearly wasn't from any accident. Then his attention shifted to Halden, and Ava watched something genuinely terrifying unfold. The commander didn't look surprised or confused. He looked like he already knew everything. Then the airport's overhead loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention all passengers at Gate 12. Please remain in the immediate area." The terminal's fluorescent lights seemed to buzz just a bit louder. A nearby security officer's radio started chirping non-stop with urgent static, and Ava heard one sentence from behind the check-in desk that made her stomach plummet. "Sir, we just received a call directly from the Pentagon." Halden froze so completely, his shoulders visibly locked up, and Ava suddenly realized something horrifying. The CEO hadn't brought her to this airport just to exile her quietly. He'd brought her here to finish this permanently. The CEO attempted to laugh it off initially, that fake, polished corporate laugh perfectly calibrated for board meetings and charity fundraisers. "The Pentagon?" he repeated, like someone had played an elaborate prank on the wrong target. But his eyes told a completely different story. His eyes were frantically scanning. Exit routes, security cameras, potential witnesses. He looked like someone who'd just realized he'd walked into a room full of people who didn't give a damn how wealthy he was. The SEAL commander didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He moved closer to Ava, just slightly, just enough that anyone watching would instantly understand the unspoken message. "She's not alone anymore." Then he spoke, low and controlled, like a warning carefully disguised as a simple question. "Ma'am," he said, "did you signal me because you're in immediate danger? Or because you're being forced onto that plane against your will?" Ava swallowed hard. Her throat felt raw and scratched, like she'd been holding her breath for 3 straight days. "Both," she whispered, and when that single word left her lips, the commander's expression didn't soften with sympathy. It hardened, like the final piece of a puzzle had just locked into place. Halden stepped forward again, moving quickly now, desperately trusting to regain control of the situation. "This is completely unnecessary," he snapped at the airport security team, then pivoted back with his artificial smile for the commander. Sir, I'm the CEO of St. Meridian Medical Center. This woman is mentally unstable. We've genuinely tried to help her. She's been making delusional accusations. She physically assaulted staff members. Ava watched the commander's eyes flick downward, just once, to her injured wrist. The dark bruises, the medical gauze, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she clutched her boarding pass. Then the commander looked back at Halden and said something that seemed to drop the temperature in the terminal. Funny, he murmured quietly. That's exactly what they said about the last nurse who tried to report you. Halden's face twitched, a microscopic crack in his polished facade. So subtle most people would never catch it. But Ava did, because she'd seen that exact crack up close in the hospital, in the administrative hallway when she attempted to file an incident report, in the CEO's corner office when she questioned why medication logs were being systematically altered, in the parking garage when he stepped aggressively into her personal space and told her she was destroying the hospital's reputation with her persistent questions. Halden wasn't afraid of the SEAL commander's military rank or authority. He was terrified of what the commander already knew. The commander gestured to a security supervisor who had rushed over. I want this man separated from her immediately, he stated. Right now. Halden instantly protested, his voice rising. You can't do that. She's my employee. The commander's head snapped toward him with precision. Not anymore, he said flatly. You made that perfectly clear. And that was the exact moment Halden finally understood. This wasn't a conversation he could charm or manipulate his way through. Security personnel stepped decisively between them, and Halden's voice climbed higher. This is harassment. I'll call my attorney. The commander didn't even blink. Call him, he replied evenly, and tell him to bring bail money. Ava stood there trembling, desperately trying to keep her expression calm and controlled. But her heart was hammering so violently, she could feel the pulse in her teeth. She'd imagined 100 different ways this confrontation could end. Not a single scenario had involved a Navy SEAL commander in combat fatigue stepping in like an immovable wall. She kept thinking the CEO would somehow flip the narrative again, make her look completely insane in front of everyone, get her forcibly dragged away in restraints. And then she heard it, a phrase she hadn't heard since her deployment in Afghanistan. The commander leaned slightly toward a nearby airport officer and spoke into the man's radio like it was the most routine thing in the world. I need a secure room, no cameras, and I need an NCIS liaison on site immediately. The officer's eyes widened visibly. He nodded rapidly and moved with purpose. Halden heard the acronym NCIS and went visibly pale. He tried to step backward, but 2 airport police officers had already positioned themselves strategically behind him. He raised his hands in an exaggerated fake gesture of surrender. This is absolutely ridiculous, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I'm a hospital executive. The commander's intense gaze didn't waver. And she's a registered nurse? He replied calmly. But somehow she's the one wearing a neck brace. Ava felt her knees go weak beneath her. She didn't know whether to break down crying or laugh hysterically. She just stared at the commander, trying desperately to understand why a man like him would risk getting personally involved in this. Then the commander finally looked at her again and said quietly, What's on your phone, Ava? Her stomach dropped like a stone, because she hadn't told him her name. Ava's hand instinctively went to her pocket. Her phone was there, the same phone she'd used to photograph confidential patient records. Like the same phone she'd used to secretly record Halden's voice in the parking garage when he thought nobody could possibly hear him. The same phone that now held enough documented evidence to completely bury him, and enough danger to bury her right alongside him. She didn't answer immediately. She just looked at the commander and realized something even more terrifying than the CEO being here at this gate. This wasn't random chance. The commander wasn't just some stranger who happened to be waiting at the same departure gate. He was here because someone had deliberately sent him. And before Ava could even formulate the question, Halden suddenly lunged forward. Not at the commander, directly at Ava. His hand shot desperately toward her pocket like a starving man grabbing at food. Give me that phone, he snarled viciously. Airport police grabbed him instantly, physically slamming him backward. Halden shouted over their grip, She's lying! She's completely insane! She stole confidential medical records. His voice echoed across the entire terminal, turning heads, pulling out smartphones, drawing immediate attention. But Ava didn't look at the gathering crowd. She looked directly at the commander. Because the commander didn't flinch at the outburst. He just said one sentence, calm as approaching death. "Ma'am, you're not leaving this country." Ava's breath caught in her throat, because she genuinely couldn't tell if that meant she was finally safe or if it meant she was about to be taken somewhere even worse. Quick question for you. Drop your answer in the comments. If you were Ava, would you have boarded that plane and disappeared quietly? Or would you risk absolutely everything to expose the truth? Ava's boots whispered against the airport carpet, each step a small rebellion her body wasn't sure it wanted to make. She couldn't recall deciding to walk, only the sensation of moving forward while something inside her pulled backward. The SEAL commander stayed at her shoulder, not hovering, not playing protector to some damsel, just present. A human shield made of silence and authority. The message radiated outward in waves. Step back. Now. Behind them, the CEO's voice still clawed at the air, performance art for a shrinking audience, insisting she was unstable. That classic word men in power use when women refuse to disappear. But something had shifted in his tone. The confidence had curdled. What remained was raw panic, dressed up in a $3,000 suit. Airport police guided him toward a side corridor, and Ava saw it with sudden clarity. He wasn't commanding anything anymore. Just a man in handcuffs, volume turned up to hide the fear. The security office was exactly what you'd expect. Institutional beige walls, one scarred table, 0 windows. The kind of space designed to strip away performance. No audience to play to, no shadows to hide in. The commander settled into the chair across from her and finally offered his name without the theater. Commander Hayes, silver threading through dark hair, a beard gone salt and pepper, eyes that carried exhaustion the way only combat does, not tiredness, but the weight of things seen that can't be unseen. His gaze dropped to her neck brace. He'd do that? Ava's hesitation lasted only a heartbeat, then she nodded. Hayes didn't react the way most people would. No sharp intake of breath, no performative outrage, just a slow, deliberate inhale, the sound of someone receiving information they'd already suspected. And the wrist? Ava's voice came out smaller than she wanted. Parking garage, he shoved me into a concrete pillar. Hayes looked at her phone. Show me what you've got. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked the screen. The evidence lived there in digital fragments. Photographs of medication logs someone had scrubbed clean. Screenshots of discharge orders pushed through over physician objections. And one audio file that turned her stomach every time she heard it. Halden's voice, stripped of all professional polish. You're nothing. I can make you disappear. She slid the phone across the table like she was handing over a loaded weapon. Hayes listened without moving. When the recording ended, silence settled over the room like dust. He stared at the screen the way you'd study a map of enemy territory. Then he said something that made the airport's air conditioning feel tropical by comparison. This isn't just hospital corruption. Ava frowned. What do you mean? Hayes shifted back in his chair. I mean, this is the exact pattern we've tracked when someone's running a medical pipeline. The room tilted. A pipeline? One nod. Certain patients discharged early, certain records modified, medications ordered and mysteriously lost. He paused. Looks like incompetence to anyone not trained to see it, but it's not incompetence. Then what is it? Supply chain. Ava's eyes found the door. Suddenly the walls felt closer. The airport felt smaller. Nowhere felt safe. Why would a hospital CEO do that? Hayes didn't soften it. Money, power, and because he's calculated that nobody will believe a nurse over a CEO in a boardroom. Ava's throat constricted. He's already convinced them I'm delusional. Hayes's eyes lifted to meet hers. Not everyone. A knock. Sharp, military precise. 2 men entered, and they weren't suits or detectives or politicians. The first was an older officer in plain uniform, posture suggesting a spine made of rebar. The second was younger, gripping a sealed evidence bag like it contained something volatile. The older man acknowledged Hayes first, then turned to Ava. Commander, we've got him in holding, already demanding his lawyer. Hayes nodded. Good. The officer's attention returned to Ava, and something shifted in his expression. Microscopic but unmistakable. Not pity, not skepticism, recognition, the kind soldiers give each other when they realize they're looking at one of their own and they're not supposed to acknowledge it in mixed company. The officer chose his words carefully. Ma'am, where did you learn that signal? Ava's pulse kicked up. Hayes remained still, watching her. She could have lied, could have said her father taught her before he died, could have blamed YouTube or some documentary. But she'd been building walls for too long, and she was exhausted from the architecture of lies. She lifted her chin and released the truth in barely more than a whisper. Afghanistan. Time stopped. The younger officer froze mid-breath. Hayes's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Ava kept going because once truth starts flowing, it doesn't stop at convenient places. I wasn't always a nurse, she said. Not over there. Hayes's eyes narrowed. Unit? The word sat in her throat like a bullet in a chamber. Saying it felt dangerous, like speaking it aloud would summon ghosts she'd spent years trying to bury. But she whispered it anyway. Task Group Viper. Combat Medic. The younger officer sucked in air like he'd been hit. The older one looked away as if memory had just landed a physical blow. Hayes didn't look impressed. He looked furious, not at her, but at the universe. They listed you KIA, he said quietly. Ava gave a small, bitter nod. That was intentional? Hayes leaned forward, voice dropping. Ava, if Halden's connected to a pipeline and you're a ghost from Viper, this is significantly bigger than one CEO. Ava's hands curled into fists. I don't care how big it is, he hurt Patience. He hurt me. Hayes held her gaze for a long moment, then he nodded. Okay, then we do this properly. Ava blinked. What does properly look like? Hayes glanced at the evidence bag. We don't just arrest him. He stood. We make him confess on record. They moved down the corridor toward Holding. Ava's legs felt leaden, but something dormant inside her was stirring awake. Something she hadn't felt since she stopped being that other person, the one who walked through fear like it was just weather. Hayes stopped outside the door and turned to her. He thinks you're isolated, thinks you're still that terrified nurse in scrubs, easy to crush. Ava's jaw set. I am terrified. Hayes nodded. Good. That means you're still human. Then he leaned closer and delivered the sentence that made her spine go rigid. When you go in there, don't threaten him. Ava frowned. Then what? Hayes's eyes were glacial. Make him feel safe. Make him talk. And the second he confesses what he did, he glanced toward the camera mounted above the door. We close the trap. Ava stared at the holding room door. Through the small, reinforced window, she could already see Halden sitting inside. And he was smiling again, like he believed he still had one final card to play. Then the door handle turned. Halden occupied the holding room like it was his private office, not hunched, not rattled, suit still immaculate, hair still precisely styled. His wrists wore handcuffs, but his expression said he considered them a temporary inconvenience. Ava stood just outside the glass, neck brace pressing into her skin, wrists still bandaged. And for a moment she felt it, that old reflex he'd trained into her muscles, to make herself smaller, to apologize for existing, to doubt her own reality. Then Commander Hayes leaned close and murmured, Let him talk. Don't engage. Don't react. Ava nodded once, and when the door opened, she entered like she was approaching a patient's bedside, not stepping into a cage with something predatory. Halden's eyes swept over her, and he released a soft chuckle. Look at you, still performing victimhood. Ava didn't sit, remained standing, calm, quiet. You called me a mental patient in front of everyone. Halden shrugged like he was discussing the weather. You are unstable. You accessed files without authorization. You fabricated narratives. You physically attacked me. Ava stared at him until his smile developed a tremor. Want to know what's amusing? He continued. Nobody actually cares about nurses, not fundamentally. They care about CEOs, board members, shareholders. And you? He leaned forward as far as the restraints permitted. You're replaceable. Ava's fingers tightened around her phone in her pocket. She kept her voice level. Then why did you follow me here? Halden's grin widened, and he answered without hesitation. Because you don't get to walk away with what you stole. The words hung in the air like a signed confession. Ava didn't move. She just let him continue. Outside the room, Hayes watched through the glass, expression carved from stone. Airport security stood nearby, but so did two men Ava hadn't registered before. Quiet, built like weapons, no visible insignia, eyes constantly scanning. Halden couldn't see them. He only saw Ava. Once only saw his target, which is exactly why he slipped. "You have no concept of who you're dealing with," he said, voice dropping an octave. "This isn't a hospital problem. This is contracts, networks, things beyond your comprehension." Ava tilted her head slightly. "Patience?" Halden laughed. "Assets." That single word made Hayes' jaw clench. Ava kept her face neutral, but inside, pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. This wasn't just greed. This was trafficking. Medication, access, human lives treated like inventory. Ava asked softly, "How many?" Halden's eyes narrowed. "How many what?" Ava leaned in just enough to suggest vulnerability. "How many people died because you needed your metrics to look good?" Halden's smile returned, cold and satisfied. "That's the beauty of it," he whispered. "Nobody can prove anything." Ava stepped backward and exhaled. "You're right." Halden blinked. That wasn't the response he'd anticipated. Ava's voice remained steady. "I can't prove what happened to the ones who died." She took a slow step toward the door. "But I can prove you assaulted me." Halden's face hardened. "You have nothing." Ava turned her head slightly, eyes still locked on him. "Say it again," Halden sneered. "I said you have nothing." Ava nodded. "No, the part about the parking garage." Halden's brow furrowed, and then his ego did what ego always does. It overrode his judgment. He smirked and said, "I put you on the concrete in that garage because you wouldn't shut your mouth." Ava didn't react. She simply opened the door and walked out. The second she stepped into the hallway, Hayes raised his hand and said, "That's sufficient." The older officer nodded and produced a small recording device from his pocket. "Captured." Halden's smile evaporated so quickly it looked like someone had erased it with Photoshop. Halden surged to his feet inside the holding room, rage detonating. He slammed his cuffed hands against the table. "You can't do this!" he shouted. "I have attorneys! I have connections!" Hayes stepped to the door and opened it slowly. Didn't raise his voice, didn't posture, just looked Halden directly in the eyes and said, "You're finished." Halden's face drained of color. "Who the hell are you?" he snapped. Hayes didn't answer immediately. He reached into his jacket and revealed a badge. One Halden recognized instantly. Not police, not hospital security, federal. Halden's throat worked. "This is a mistake," he stammered. Hayes leaned in close, voice like cold steel. "You made a mistake the moment you assumed a nurse couldn't destroy you." Halden looked past him at Ava. "She's lying," he said, desperation bleeding through now. Ava didn't speak. She just watched him collapse, and for the first time since that parking garage, she felt her lungs expand fully. The terminal outside continued its ordinary chaos. Flights boarding, coffee brewing, families reuniting. But in that narrow hallway, Halden's entire world imploded in real time. He was escorted out in handcuffs, and as he passed Ava, he tried one final manipulation. He leaned toward her and hissed, "You think you won?" Ava's eyes didn't waver. "No," she said quietly. "I think the patients did." Halden's face contorted, and then he was gone, swallowed by officers and consequences. Hayes remained with Ava. He didn't congratulate her, didn't call her a hero, just asked, "Where were you headed?" Ava swallowed. "Anywhere that wasn't here," she admitted. Hayes nodded like he understood viscerally. "You don't have to run anymore." Ava looked down at her bruised wrist. "I don't know how to be normal." Hayes' voice softened, just fractionally. "Normal is overrated. Honest is better." They sat near the windows afterward, watching the storm roll in, slow and gray and inevitable. Ava watched planes taxi and lift into the sky, and she realized she wasn't boarding hers. Not because she was trapped, because she didn't need to vanish anymore. Her phone buzzed once, unknown number. Hayes glanced at the screen and his expression shifted. "It's for you." Ava hesitated, then answered. A calm, authoritative voice spoke from the other end. "Ava, this is Admiral Cross." Ava's blood went cold. Hayes straightened slightly. The voice continued. You've been difficult to locate. Ava's throat tightened. Sir! The Admiral's tone wasn't angry. It was almost relieved. Your father would have been proud. Ava's eyes burned. She hadn't heard anyone speak her father's name aloud in years. The Admiral paused, then said, We're bringing you in, not as a nurse, not as a witness. Ava's grip tightened on the phone. Then as what? The Admiral's answer came like a door unlocking. As family? And as protection? Ava didn't cry in the terminal. She waited until she was alone in the small office, until the adrenaline finally drained, until her body remembered it was permitted to feel again. Then the tears came, silent, shaking, exhausted. Not because she was weak, because she'd been strong for far too long. Hayes stood at the door and didn't intrude. He just said, You did good. Ava wiped her face and gave a small nod. I almost ran. Hayes's voice stayed steady. And you still came back. Ava looked out at the storm again. She didn't feel safe yet, but she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, seen. And if you made it to the end of this story, please subscribe. Seriously, these stories only stay alive because you're here. Drop a comment too. Where are you watching from? And have you ever been in a moment where everyone gave up, but you had to stay calm anyway? And hey, the next story is already loaded. If you're not feeling sleepy yet, go watch it.